Hey, thanks, guys, for your diligence and hanging in here. We'll try to get through this course material that we have tonight. Talk a little bit about the way ahead, and looking forward to catching up with you. It's been I think September is the last time we had a touch point, and so we'll be focused primarily on the projects for this course. Very similar to what we did back in September and the class before that, Master Business Process 1. So let me just kind of, before we get started in tonight's material and everything else, questions that you may have. No questions?
Professor, some people might be having issues with audio. There's a message saying that connection by internet is disabled by organizer.
Oh, no. Hold on, let me see what we can do to fix that.
Yeah, it told me that too. I had to log out and shut everything down and restart.
Yeah, I know what the issue is, because I've had should have been everyone that had either computer or telephone access. Okay. Anybody else still having problems?
Yeah, I'm having problems too.
Is that you, Ron?
I'm okay now.
Yeah, it's me. Kind of going in and out. Kind of bad area right now. Getting home soon.
Okay. Hey, Danelle, are you on? Can you hear me? Hi, Judith. Glad to have you here.
Good to go, sir.
Hey, how's the Air Force doing today, Sam? Oh, okay. Edgar, you're still audio problem. I don't know what we can do to other than if you still are having problems. Let me just send a chat on it. Okay. Okay. While we're waiting to see if everybody can get their ears on, let me see if there's any questions that you guys may have had before we get into the class materials tonight. Anything at all? As you know, there's a transition with the school, and I don't know too much more than probably you do at this point. I do know there's going to be a meeting next week and have a chance to find out a little bit more about that. But as far as I know, no change is going to impact you guys as you get forward towards your end of your degree here. We will have this class, you have 2 more, and then we're back again at the end of February and complete in March is what our glide path looks like. And if you're still having a problem with your audio, could you, let's see, send me a chat if you Still having problems with audio. Okay. Okay, looks like Edgar just came back in, and was it Ron Kaufman that you just finished your class up with?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. How was that course that you went through? No comment? Anybody know?
It was good. I struggled to find the relevance of a couple of the assignments that we had, but overall, I think the material was good. I learned a lot of good stuff in that class.
Okay.
From my
All right.
point of view, I think it was a good class as well, sir. My only issues was I understand the concept and the best way to apply it. However, some of the graphics were kind of like, I mean, to me at least, they were confusing. And but some of the illustrations, the videos that he had were pretty good. So I was better. It was better for me to understand him through the videos that he had. But some of those graphics, they were kind of like confusing to me.
Okay. Okay. Appreciate the feedback. All right. Looks like Edgar still has some problems with his, and I'm going to be recording this session, and for some reason you're not able to get that part, we'll make this available for everyone as well. And we'll be building on that class as well as your benchmarking class and everything else that you've had in this course, and kind of this is where we integrate things. The tough part about this course is, well, of course, it's the time of the season we're in. We've got the holidays right in here, and so I'm going to kind of talk to you about the flow. There's a few corrections, I think, if you're using the slides that was posted in the portal. I've made some modifications, some minor ones, and just talk about how we're going to work through this course over the holidays and the approach to that. First of all, there's just going to be this webinar tonight for everyone, just one large session. There's not going to be a second large webinar where you have to do a briefing back to your teammates. It'll be done with me. So that will be one of the things that we'll accommodate here, is that we'll have 2 mentoring sessions at least with you in each of the teams. We'll cover the very specifics that we'll have in each one of those sessions. In a moment, we'll cover the slides about the expectations of that. But the final presentation really is going to be you guys briefing, where I'm going to just listen to you. You're going to go through the entire history, your story of your project, and cover as if you're going to do your final briefing. It's going to be very similar for this approach that we're going to use for this course that you will use when we get back together for your final course, and that is that you basically give a presentation about 30 minutes about the key points from the very beginning of your project all the way up to where you are now in this course. And then, of course, we'll add the additional material in as you get into Master Business Process 3. And so that's going to be basically you doing a presentation as a team, having different parts, covering each one of those, each one of you present to that. And then what we'll do is then have a critique after that, after your presentation. We'll talk about strengths and such as we go through. So our first mentoring session, as we go through this, we'll talk a little bit about this assessment I'll cover in a minute. It will be more informal. We'll talk about your presentation, where you are. Typically, then if there's quite a bit of work to do, we may have a second session that we just talk about that, and then a third session where you do the primary briefing back to me. some teams have it nailed at the end of the first sections, are ready to go final to the final brief. So there is that possibility of just having 3 courses instead of 4. But depends on where you are as a team, whether you're meeting the satisfactory progress of what you need to have in here into the materials. We'll cover that in detail, so you have a clear picture about what the deliverables and requirements of this course are. And we'll work with your schedule then about when we can do this. Not going to do anything on Christmas, not going to do anything on New Year's, but pretty much I'm going to be open to include weekends if you want to schedule time for your team to do your mentoring sessions and get your requirements out. And so I'll go through that a little bit more in detail, but any initial questions on that? All right. Well, let's continue on, because I know that having a double header, getting the team out on the field for the second day is tough. And so let's kind of go through this course and get the material out of the way and get you to your questions of what we need to do ahead. So basically, you should be kind of finalizing your measurement phase. If you haven't already, we're going to look for you to really spend some time in gathering the data that you need, and then getting into the analysis. We are looking for you to bring everything that we've learned up to this point together and integrate it. And that's probably the greatest challenge I have found with NGS students, is that you're kind of used to briefing each one of these classes that we're going through, but again, this is where we integrate things. And so we're looking for the linkages between what this data is telling us, and then how you use that later on, how you're integrating your benchmarking findings and your Lean Six Sigma findings and all those type of things into a cohesive set of recommendations. We're also going to kind of evaluate your team progress. We did last time, I think it was back in September, and I promise you we'll do that again. And so be it. We have a form that we'll be using for this. I'll cover that with you. It's an Excel spreadsheet. There's an individual component, and then there is a team component. And I will cover the process for that. So, and basically, I'm going to give you a feedback on whether I think you're right on target or you need to do some catching up between now and to ensure that you can meet the goals for the graduation on time. Here's the assignments. It's kind of a light listing, other than putting together a large part of your presentation. There is the team assessment, and then there will be the briefings that we have where you come together. We'll kind of go over the material, talk about your projects. We'll give you the tailored mentoring about where you are, maybe specific areas you haven't thought about. Talk to each one of your teams in your particular circumstance. And then there are some discussion questions that we have, an update of the tracker. And so that is important. Now, the charters are very, very important, this aspect. So we can't go beyond this course and have them uploaded into your tracker, fully signed, without, and that's a no-go for the course. So if we don't have that done by the end of this course, school policy is that you basically stop your presentation till that gets done. Now, we talked about them in September. If you remember September, that's kind of a long time ago, right? And I know we have some teams, we got the non-disclosure signed, but charter needs to be uploaded. And each one of you had some drafts, but we really need to get the signatures. If you haven't already, that charter, along with the non-disclosure statement, uploaded into the tracker, fully signed by the end of this course. So if there's any issues around that, and if there's any showstoppers that you may be encountering with your project, whether your champion's got some cold feet or a big change has come up, we had teams at this point where I remember one of them got notified that they were, being sold. The company was being sold. And so that had kind of an impact on the project very late in the game. Then we worked our way around it. But if there are any showstoppers, from any of you, for any of your projects, I want you to let me know, send me an email or give me a call tonight or tomorrow, and let me know if there's that issue. So I want to be clear about that up front. And so these are really the deliverables we have. Again, we're going to be looking at this. The other references that we have pretty much are the ones who you've always used before. And there are, in addition, some examples of other team projects that are provided in the course material. Here again is where we are against the DMAIC model. You should be at this process, at this point, you should be getting all the information you got from all these other activities. And if you're still collecting data, which is sometimes normal at this point, but you should be able to have enough data to start to bring into analysis and starting to develop recommendations for improvement. And so that is where we're going to focus in. I'll cover a couple of tools, some approaches that may be helpful for that. We'll talk a little bit about some things way ahead for your control, which is actually that last control is going to be typically part of the briefing that you put together in Master Business Process 3. Typically, once you get all your recommendations together, if you're going to do a pilot, which is something that gets done around the improve phase, where you try out your recommendations and then evaluate them and learn from them, and then before you do it on a larger scale. And we'll ask each of you and your teams if you're going to be doing pilots of your recommendations, doing it on a small scale or doing it, you know, for an X period of time where you're going to evaluate that pilot and then see, you know, what you've learned from that. So I'm going to ask the teams, if you're going to be in that circumstance, if so, you want to include the results from your pilot. And then what you do is develop what we call a control phase. I'll touch a little bit on that tonight. We'll cover a little bit more when we get Master Business Process 3, but we want to be sure you have clarity about the way ahead. So this is where we are here in this phase. Here's what it looks like against the project management phases. Typically, monitoring control is, you know, part of that is, are you hitting the mark? You know, are you, you know, achieving the goals of your project? So that's my, you know, the faculty evaluation, working with you, your team evaluation is part of the monitoring control of your project, and that's kind of where we are. Now, in the closure phase of this, again, will be primarily when we get together in Master Business Process 3. You're going to be saying, okay, how do I transition this project back over to the organization? The things that we've done as a team, who are you going to hand it off to? For the most part, many of you are going to be who are the primary sponsors in the organizations, often are that, you know, turnover point. But if you're doing this externally, or if you're doing this within your own organization and you're facilitating it and then you leave, you know, how do you turn this information back over to, you know, the process owner or the division chief or whoever you've been working with? Typically are the things that come under closure. So that's where we are. Again, these are good techniques if you're briefing. You know, I always kind of use these things if we're doing a project and we're following a DMAIC a model on it. We just kind of, you know, tell the client or the sponsor, the champion, whoever, you know, we're working for, so here's where we are. So it's really clear in the process, so they know where you are. And so we're going to be looking for you as well to associate each one of your slides with this DMAIC process and be sure that you can brief that and know where you are in that and that you know what's coming ahead as well. So we want you to show your familiarity, your knowledge, and how to use the DMAIC. And then the other thing, hopefully, that you're kind of learning as you're going through this course, how long does it take to get each one of these type of things done, right? You know, you've been working on, you know, parts of this, the benchmarking, the data collection, you've been doing the value stream and other lean type of things. Now you're going to come up with a class that will give you some financial information. You're going to have a supplier course as well upcoming. And hopefully in the practical application of this is you start to glean a little bit, how long does it take you to actually do these things? You know, if you're going to do these complete. The class schedule provides kind of artificiality to it, but if you're just kind of doing a project and laying out a schedule, we want you to have that kind of feel as well. So I'm going to ask you as we go through, and your evaluation is, do you think you're on target? You as a team, you know, I'll give you my 25-cent view about where I think you are as a team, but I'm very interested in whether you as individual members think you're on track. So we'll have that discussion when we get together in the mentoring session. We'll have a forum for you to evaluate where you are currently Again, that's another tool you may want to use in actual practice. And so we are again looking at, you've seen this chart before, integrating all the information that you have. And so that you're able to apply the various tools that have been provided, of course, in this curriculum, and that you have a working knowledge of that. And so, and again, in my experience, it's the integration of all these tools, the hybriding of these tools, the interrelationship of them is where the real power is in a change agent's toolkit, and just makes you much more effective. The more you can bring into the workplace, multidisciplines, different approaches, and hopefully this course has exposed you to a fairly wide variety. As you notice, we don't go real deep in any of these. We haven't gone into statistical analysis really deep, which is typically part of the black belt. You can get into benchmarking, and I've done a lot of that. There is a lot of techniques that we can talk about within that really kind of makes that refined. So we kind of keep you at a broad level, giving you many tools, but give you maybe enough to whet your appetite if you want to go deeper in each one of these later on as you go through your career. So again, we're going to be looking at the integration, the effective use of this, your team dynamics. Root cause analysis is part of the thing that we're going to be looking for in your projects. Have you been able to get to the the key items that are causing the sources of the problem for not meeting the performance levels that so desired by your champion or by your customers, or and as that's defined in your problem statement. So we're going to be looking at that root cause analysis and that discussion about what you're finding. And so let me ask folks at this point, and just kind of go around quickly when we talk about the projects itself. Can each member of the team kind of just summarize where you think you are? Have you any major issues? And so, are you able at this point to say whether you've got some root causes that you think you've been able to identify from your data collection? So let me just kind of get a feel from one member from each team to just kind of give me an idea where you think you are in regards to progress and data collection, and whether you think you've got some ideas around root causes. So,
how you doing, Professor? It's Jay.
Hey, Jay.
I guess for our team, we've got the data, a lot of data actually. We're just trying to figure out which the data is more pertinent, and after we've decided that, we want to figure out how we're going to display it. What tools we're going to use, or charts or graph. And some of the hurdles, because we are military, we're limited to what we can and can't do, and we also deal with vendors, civilian vendors.
These are great topics. What type of charts and graphs, and how do you best display this in our mentoring session? Because hey, you got some unique attributes to yours that we'll talk about, and having walked that road with the government and the understanding the contractor dynamic, that's important to that. Let's bring that up when we get together. So overall, Jay,
what do you think about the supply? Because we're maintenance, and then we deal and depend on supply, and they're a whole nother unit with a whole nother different leadership, commanders and all. So going in and telling other people how to run their business is going to be a problem. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing that, if you remember when we first started out, is that the sponsor and your problem statement, the scope, has to be within your sponsor's ability to implement the recommendations, right? They have the authority to implement that. And what you're talking about is very typical. In other words, you come up and say, hey, we found some things that may be outside your lane, but are really maybe the root causes of what are your problems that we've identified. And they may be outside the control of the champion. And where you handle that, and where I would recommend, is that teams often tee up and says, here are the things that we're recommending that you can improve in your neighborhood. champion. Here are the things you can improve in your processes and the ways that you can change your policies and procedures that you can implement. And then you recommend targets and say, okay, your next recommendations that we would recommend that you try to look to improve this process would be X, Y, Z for these reasons, okay? And so a lot of times, a part of your final briefing is that here's the things we recommend based on where we started in our problem statement. And we think that the highest value thing that you concentrate your improvement resources on next would be X, Y, Z. And there may be things like this that belong to a vendor or another supplier, or things are outside their control. And so you don't leave it hanging, but you be sure you extend anything that the champion can do. So that sound about right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So your overall assessment. Anybody from the team want to jump in on that? How do you think prime aircraft is at this point, and are you able to start to see some root causes of perhaps the issues that you have about improving that aircraft readiness? Okay. If not, Jay, you got anything else?
No, sir. That's all I had.
Uh-huh.
No, I would like to hear, like from my team members, because I speak military language, and a lot of that was in the beginning. That was a boundary between us because I speak military language, and they're on the civilian side, so I didn't quite understand what they were looking at and how they were perceiving it, and vice versa.
Okay. I think Megan, she sent me that she may be late. I know she's maybe out, and then so okay.
I'm here, sir.
Okay, Jada.
What was your question again about what we've learned about the root cause of the?
Yeah, I just want to get your impression about the project at this point. Are you thinking that you have sufficient data, you start to see some root causes, kind of at a high level? I don't want to get, we'll talk this in a lot more specific, but any other things you would like to add where you are?
Yes, sir. I think we've reached a point where we've definitely established what the root cause of the issue within the unit, the maintenance unit, has been, and how long it's been going on, and the key areas that we need to look into in order to resolve the problem. And like Jay said, yes, we don't want to tell people how to run their shops. However, we can always recommend some changes in the processes, and they can do a better test if they want. But I think we still can affect some positive change. The buy-in is the biggest thing, is to get the buy-in from the champion and the other guys in order to implement the changes that we will recommend at the end of the day.
Okay, good. And also, by the way, sometimes you may get recommendations that are outside the scope of your project, right? But also you may find applications of your recommendations that may apply to other areas that you weren't part of your project, and say, oh, by the way, we think, you may need to go look at the suppliers, here's some things like that. But also you might say, hey, I think this same set of improvements that we're recommending may be a benefit to another part of the organization. So be sure you capture that as a part of your master business process 3, not this one, but the one cup coming. Are the things that you're finding be applied to other units, other parts of the organization? They replicate this, duplicate it, and get great benefit out of your recommendations from other part of the organization. So consider both of those, recommendations to improve and then applications to other areas. So, okay, good. Hey, great to hear you both.
Yes, sir.
And, all right, thanks. Hey, high level, let's see, Cameron, Edgar? Edgar, maybe not fix your audio yet. Edgar, are you on with
Let's see. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right. Well, from a high level perspective, that's what we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Um, we kind of do know root cause. There's actually a couple of them that we're working on. We have been trying to have a meeting with our champion, but unfortunately, there's been a lot of sporadic things happening because of business travel and projects and whatnot. Um, let's see. We're supposed to have a meeting actually with our champion tomorrow, and we have been working on some of the recommendations that we want to bring up. There have been some things that we definitely want to develop a little bit more. We were wanting to do a survey for some of our techs and operators in our sub, but we haven't been able to do that because of the workload that we have. And then our champion had also indicated that he wanted some other information and a couple other things added, more specifically to, how can I say this? Pretty much just to help out, to not only benefit our cell, but something that can be passed on to all the other cells. So not only improve our FPY, but the FPY of all the other cells. And so we're trying to come up with, see how we can adapt it to everything else.
Okay. Good. So overall, it sounds like this is kind of it's not too dissimilar to what we talked about last time. Bandwidth, getting the champion engaged. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's one of the issues that we're dealing with. That's probably, well, out of the two major issues, like I said, our current major issue between Cameron and I is just being able to come up with a proper recommendation of something that is actually realistic and that we can actually really recommend and then hopefully get the buy-in for. And the other one is just, unfortunately, the champions' schedule has been erratic.
Okay. Yeah, this is actually probably one of the most challenging aspects of being involved with improvement projects is managing the client, managing the champion, the director, who you're doing this work for. And each of you got different challenges and you've got different issues. And from all of these, hopefully you're able to, I know you listen a lot to each other about what you're briefing. But this part, which is often invisible, because and you guys are unique because you're walking the halls, right? You get to do things face to face. Rest of you, there's only one of you in the team doing that, and that is a very big challenge. But this is a very important aspect of your learning and doing projects very well, particularly if you're doing it at a black belt level, because you are really the interface between the teams a lot of times and the senior leadership, to the people that have the resources that you're, either borrowing at a ad hoc basis or that you're managing programs for or kind of convinced. And every one of them has a different set of dynamics about that. So techniques about that, there are some things that you need to be able to do as we go through. I'm going to play the role of the champion. So when you're briefing, okay, when you are briefing your projects, you're going to be briefing your champion, okay? So when you come and do your briefing, I want you to pretend that briefing me, but you're briefing your champion, okay? And I'm going to then, as we go through this, I want to listen to this and maybe ask you some questions that you may anticipate from your champion. But if there are issues of ownership, if there are issues of buy-in to this, I want you to think about that force field analysis. These are the things that you need to consider and say, okay, if we really don't have things, the buy-in, or there's issues in here, are there anything we can do to change what we got currently in our venue of things, that how we either do our briefings, or perhaps there are some really important factors we can bring in, like we've discovered some things that really are important to the organization. We'll talk about that, because each one of you has a little different issues with your champion, but I want you to think about what would be the selling points to your champion. I will reinforce, I say this often to the teams, and it just resonates a lot of times. in addition to being in the quality business, you guys are in the sales business. You're selling these recommendations. You're selling the goodness of your solutions that are based on logic, the charts that you've had, the solid conclusions you've got based on data. Your charts should be presentable, readable, convincing. And a lot of times that's important aspect that a lot of students, when they first kind of going through this, or, but you're actually kind of selling this product of a set of recommendations. And you've got to change the ownership from you doing the team coming up with this into saying, these are your improvements. These are your, what your workforce has told us, and we are telling back to you, are here are the recommendations for your solutions. It's a little bit things like that where you're transitioning from here's our recommendations to we're working for you. These are going to be the things you will be implementing, and getting the ownership about how do you, champion, want to go about getting the best value for the time you've invested in our work. So it's real kind of over time you kind of develop a finance, the techniques, and every organization has a little different thing, and it's often invisible, but a lot of times this is what makes these projects sell, is how you present it, not only what you have. So I'm going to be listening for that when we do our briefings, that you're going to be convincing, that you are confident, that you understand this, and that you're going to provide not just recommendations, but recommendations based on a solid, logical, here's what we did, our problem statement, here's the data we collected, here's the scope of this is the what we got from your workforce, here's what this tool told us that could be an opportunity for improvement, this is what we found in our benchmark. So you got, a real logical, strong thing, and that's where I want you to do. I want you to practice your presentations before we get to, I want you to be able to be polished in your presentations before you do the final one with me. I want you to time them, to be sure that each one of you can make that 30-minute, each team can get your 30 minutes of briefing in of everything you're going to do. That means you're going to have to be concise and you're going to have to pick things up. So, hey guys, I just want to get a high level, but you gave me an opportunity to reinforce some really important things going out of this course, so thanks. Edgar, there was anything else? Let me get back on the topic of your project. Anything else that you have?
No, like I said, just that I can think of is like Cameron and I just need to look over some of our data and conduct a small survey with our QA techs and a few of the operations people, just to make sure that what our recommendations are actually align with what we're currently seeing at the moment.
Good. All right. Let's talk about how that will be administered and time frame for that. So when we get it back together, let's talk a little bit about the details in that. Okay. My other question to you: what's the temperature there?
What is it? High today was like 75, I think. Mid 70s. Low for the night, I think it's somewhere around high 50s. I'm not sure, to be honest. Let's just say you can still go outside in the afternoon and you'll still see people with shorts and sandals every once in a while.
Yeah, okay. You're in the Key West contingency. They're just very tough to talk to in the wintertime. Okay, thanks. All right. Hey, okay. How about eating, guys?
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yeah. We got you.
So we have a couple things. We know that we've actually made a recommendation already on one portion of the project, something we noticed, the team noticed, so we took that to the champion for them to look into. And it looks like they're vetting that out with the engineering department right now, but some of the other information we have is we know from a lot of the data that was collected and the previous data that was collected from another engineering group that even if we take all the variation out of this process, it'll be very hard to have a CPK of 133 or better. So no matter what, this is borderline not manufacturable, just because of the design parameters. So we know that going into it now, right? So the problem is now we've been through thousands and thousands of pieces of data, and the data is showing us that we're down to minuscule adjustments, and those adjustments are critical to product reliability. So it's a pretty tough situation. And on top of that, they decided to move the product line to another plant. So on top of, the cardinal rule of transferring a product that has a robust process value stream in place to begin with, and then transfer that to another place. So we have an unstable condition already, and then we have to transfer it to another plant. So we have a double whammy going on.
Okay. Yeah, it's amazing how real world is a little different than academic, isn't it? Well, good. I mean, here's what we're looking for. Again, and let me just reiterate that we're looking for you in this course to understand, as you go through this, it's how you deal with these things that do come up. Because I don't think there's ever any project that I've been involved, maybe one of you guys have, but I've never had it run like I thought I was going to plan. There's always something, like you just mentioned, maybe fairly significant that jumps up and kind of impacts that. So let's talk about what that might do to your recommendations, how that you might even reshape this. Are you going to provide recommendations for the new location? Is that part of the scope? I don't want to get into it now. But I think when we first started, because you had you had a manufacturing process, and so we kind of thought, at least my gut feel was that whatever you were going to come up with, it was kind of getting towards that Six Sigma, really getting it down into the niches. So that was something I was kind of thinking when we first talked about that you really weren't that far out at the beginning when we were looking at improvements. But is the champion still engaged? What's your impression? Has there been any issues around that?
Nope, no problem with that. Champion's engaged, and our recommendations will be flowed out at the other plant. So the other plant that the product line is going to is in Indonesia. So all of our recommendations have to be vetted out here, and then they have to be sent to the other plant, because the other plant is not allowed to make their own technical decisions.
Got it. Okay. Change of ownership. Okay. Change of scope. All right. Hey, any other folks from that team want to contribute, chime in? Rand, Ron, Sam, sit down.
Sorry, this is Ron. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, they pretty much covered. I know it was one of the things that we went through is the extensive kind of research that our predecessors who attempted to kind of help with the problem, the thoroughness that they did, kind of like really evaluated kind of like what they did, and kind of like almost kind of went with them through the whole journey and how thorough they've been, even to get to these like minute details that we're talking about. Sometimes like kind of getting rid of variables is just as important as finding that like minuscule one variable. And it was a great process to share with my teammates, and I thought it was pretty effective, and it's pretty helpful for the future here.
Okay. Good. Thanks. All right. If there's again, we'll talk more about your projects a little bit further. Thanks, guys, for giving me a quick update. I haven't heard anything that would be any barn burners for any of you at this point. One of the things that, you brought up some recommendations, interim ones, and that's a very important decision in any project. A lot of times you want to get early gains, reinforce that you have the ability to deliver some results. There is some cautions as you go through that. You know, if you haven't fully identified root causes and you give it too prematurely, sometimes that, you know, they already think you got a solution, then you're kind of still working through the data. But a lot of that is judgmental. And so we'll talk about, you know, the recommendations you already put forth and how those may be evaluated, because we'll talk about a control plan as well. For whatever you're recommending, how is it being evaluated? How are you going to ensure that it hits the target? So if there are recommendations in place and you have time to evaluate them to see whether they have that longer term and sustainable results that you project, that may be something also to include in that. So we'll talk with you and your team about, you know, what you already provide in place. It sounds like you got some analysis, and then that. I want you, every single one of you, when you do your briefing, a lot of times what NGS teams fail to do is like a ton of things you've already come up with as improvements or recommendations, but you don't give yourself credit for it in the project. Oh, yeah, we found this, we developed a flow chart, never was flow charted before. Well, that is a result. You've given them something they didn't have before. We've provided a change in their process. You know, we talked to them, we've already implemented. That is a result. I will say often that your charts that you put together about what your recommendations are, and when we go through this discussion, there's usually a ton of things that you guys have not captured in writing about what you've developed. And I want you to be sure to think about all of those things. You know, hell, we've made recommendations for a different type of training, or we took a look at, you know, how we onboard people came in, you know, differently that will help us prevent new people from doing this. Lots of those type of things should be captured. So I want you to think about, when you have your team meetings, all the recommendations that you're thinking about or have already implemented, and be sure you give yourself credit and put them into your project. There's a lot of these other ones you may have, like in your benchmarking kinds of things, and so we want to be able for you to bring that all together and bring that to roost. Okay, let me charge on, because I know you guys would here for the second night. We've talked about, you know, the Pareto. We did that, I know for sure, when we talked back in September. You got to have one of those. You got to have Pareto charts. You got to be able to explain them. You got to talk about how are you going after the, you know, the tall poles or the peaks, whatever you want to call it. You know, but basically show your capability to talk to that chart. Some of these are sometimes more pertinent to others based on your project, but we do need to have that as a part of that. And as part of that root cause analysis, I want you to be able to talk about that, you know, as you go through your analysis. You know, what are the root causes, where we have described that, what does that look like, or if you've worked at root cause. In other words, you come up with, you know, cost savings of time, but you really haven't got to the root cause of a defect or an issue. So then so stated. So we're looking for you just to be sure that you understand the concept and how to apply that, and also the tools within that. 5 whys, you know, we've talked about that. You had a discussion question before, so I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm just going to say that's going to be part of our discussion that we go through. Here is an assignment chart that I wanted to cover with you because it's got some dates on it. This one's got some things in red that probably are not in your, if you downloaded this slide deck earlier, I put that in there. First of all, there's an individual assessment. I'm going to cover that right after I do this slide. That needs to be done by you as individuals by next Wednesday, okay? And I would like to see that individual assessment. Then after you do your individual ones, which we'll do without discussion with your other teammates, is then I want you, after you do your individual assessment and send it to me, is that get together as a team and come to a consensus about where you think you are based on this set of questions we have in this assessment. And then there is a sheet that you will fill out and say, here are how we rated ourselves as a team, okay? And so it is a consensus discussion. And what does consensus mean? Can somebody give me a working definition of what you think consensus means? Anybody want to take a shot?
Sorry, can you ask the question again? I was in and out.
What does consensus mean? And we say we're going to have a team, and we're going to have come up with a consensus score. What does that mean? What do you think does that mean? And how would you go about doing that to get a consensus around a evaluation, and let's say using 3 or 4 people?
Well, consensus to me is kind of like a thoughtful, agreed to, focal point of the whole group, kind of like an understanding or kind of, where are we headed kind of like thing. To get that way, I would have kind of like a group meeting and kind of like really hash it out. It's kind of like let's get into a full all-around agreement. Kind of what I figured.
Okay. All right. So it's a hashing out. It's a group discussion, agreement. Anybody else have nuances they want to add into this?
I think also, in addition to just a general agreement of opinions based on the group, it's also a way to move forward or move ahead with the project and the decisions that we're getting to.
All right. How about the techniques of consensus? Do you have any advice if you're facilitating this consensus discussion? What were some of the things that may be important to do to ensure that you do have agreement, that you do have buy-in, that you do have not only agreement, but everybody's committed to that course of action that you discussed? Anybody have any facilitator type of skills or recommendations how to do this?
I would always fall back on the old sticky notes technique where we do like a quick 15-minute, positive and negatives, just spew them all out. I write them down, put them on the wall, and then we start to generate them and group them into a flow.
Okay. All right. Then how do you know, once those things are up on the wall, that everybody actually agrees with whatever you decide is the agreement point?
Well, that's when we would have the talks. So literally the 15 minutes is everybody has their own sticky pads, and then they individually all go up there and put whatever they want up there. Then the facilitator would go up and just kind of go over each sticky note and ask them directly, what do you guys think about this one and where should it go?
Okay. So you have that discussion, you have kind of facilitate. Let me offer a couple of techniques that I've learned over time, in particular around consensus. One is that always obtain either a verbal or a physical indicator that they actually agree to that score, or they agree to that course of action, or they agree to that goal. Whatever you're trying to do, what I would hardly recommend, and I've learned this the hard way through experience, is that never accept silence or no comment as consensus. Okay. Those are typically the snipers out there. They're, I didn't agree to that. So whenever there is an important part of trying to say, do you all buy into it? Now, they may come up with a solution. You may come up with a solution that, well, it may not be one point of view. It may be a combination, but you don't necessarily have to go to the average. It may be sometimes when you do a consensus, or we were at a 1, somebody thought we were at 5. Okay, we'll just average that out. That is not consensus. You got to agree on the number. We all agree it's a 4 or a 5, and it forces a discussion about why somebody really thinks that they're a 1 or somebody else thinks a 5. And often the compromise is, oh, we'll just average that out. And a lot of times after that discussion, everybody may have gone to the 4 or to the 5, and everybody else saw the other point of view and went to the 1. And so my recommendation to you as a skill set, and this is a very powerful one, that whenever particularly important decisions are where you need the commitment of the people there, and that you need to have them not only agree to it, but ensure that after that meeting breaks up, they are not going to go back and say, oh, okay, I really didn't agree to that, or I didn't say anything, therefore I'm not committed. And so typically in the consensus session, particularly for big important decisions, okay, do you agree with it? Go around the room, like on the phone. Yes, I do. No, I don't. I don't support that. I think we were really out of 3, and I just can't justify that. And if you're in a room, sometimes you, hey, give me a thumbs up, give me a thumbs down, and hopefully those are the only 2, digits that they're using at that point. So that is something that I've seen, and I've done quite a few things like strategic planning, where you're making really important decisions for the organization, and you want everybody in that room to, when they leave, they all agree to it. And it's amazing. I have never seen this fail when there's an important decision. You go around a room and they have to physically give you, yes, I am committed to it. I buy into it. It may not be 100%, but I'm willing to live with this decision. I'm willing to live with that decision. I'm willing to support it. Is that they often will come up with ideas, and that extends the conversation, but it also makes a better decision. And because you really got all the points of view. It gets the elephants out of the, the big elephant out of the room, that they talk about them at that point, because you're asking for commitment. So that's why I bring that up, and why I've asked and kind of emphasized this idea of consensus, is that I want you to have a discussion. Okay, if one of you individually rates something as a 1 and somebody else in that team rates it at a 5, please just don't average it out. I want you to talk about the reasons why somebody thought it was a 1, and listen. You should be, hopefully at this point in your team progress, in your storming, forming, norming, all that, is that you should have the ability to have open and honest conversation. If you can't do that, then you are not at that level. And that's important, because you need to evaluate that. You need to evaluate your teams. If you're in a black belt and they're at this point in your project, if they're working well together, you kind of have a good sensing, and you'll have that ability for them to be candid and honest and throw that into the mix. If the team is not, then you need to kind of work that through, because typically as you get towards the end of the project, things get accelerated, and usually the team kind of falls apart as the suspense gets through and they don't agree to things and that type of thing. So you want to have that kind of important part. So that's one of the things I want you to do, is on this assignment, individual, team, I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, then what we're going to do is that before we have our first mentoring session, you send me your team and your team scores. You've already sent me your individual scores. We're going to talk about in our first mentoring session. And then you're going to have a set of slides that you need to put together. So you may not be ready to have your first mentoring session next Wednesday. You certainly need to do the evaluation. If you can pull these slides together and do this evaluation and have this discussion, that's fine. But I want you to be able to have this discussion as a team, and then also pull these things together before we have our first mentoring session. We'll cover the slides in a moment. Let me switch over and show you. If I get this over to the Excel. And let's see if my screen is picking this up. Here's the Excel spreadsheet that's in the portal. It's got instructions to it. This is the first page of it. It's in Excel. Okay. When you do your individual, be sure to put your name on it. Okay. When you upload it, be sure your name is on this. You just take this individual one. You don't have to fill out the team. Just do the individual one. Put your individual name on that sheet, and then you upload it into the digital Dropbox before next Wednesday. And then after you do that individual one, okay, this is what the individual one looks like. It goes a Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And it's got all the questions about student team. You deliver on every assignment on time, you do products A-rate, the sponsor relationship, the project relationship. I want you to go all through all this and rate it, okay, put comments on that, send that to me. keep whole numbers. Don't put, 4.15 or something like that. Just, 4, 5, and then so we can figure that out. And then after you do that, okay, I want you to share your responses and then get together as a team and then fill this thing out. And that's where I'm looking for the individual. Okay, no averaging on it. I want you to come to consensus on these scores here as you go through. And then in here, if you will, put your individual scores. Where did you start with? Okay, we had somebody rated a 2, somebody put a 4, another one put a 4. So your original individual scores, the ranges in here, and then your actual team scores, if you will, in that. Okay, does that make sense to you? Anybody have any questions? Here's kind of one that's filled out, how it looks like from the individual side of the house. But this is in your portal, course materials. Any questions about that? Get back to the slide here. Okay, so that assessment, and then what we're going to do then, basically, when we get together, we'll talk about the rest of your where you are in the project. You go through the slides. I'll give you my feedback on that, and then what I really would like for you to do then is practice doing a briefing, 30-minute briefing with all the slides you have. Be sure they're going to be each slide marked with which one is relates to the DMAIC model. Brief the DMAIC model, bring it in, you cover the slides, and we have a list of those, what those look like in here as well. Okay, here's the sequence of the slide and what we need to have. These are the basically requirements. Slide, most of these you already have. You're just building onto it. The data that you collected. Remember, you should have a data collection plan. Then the data that you have collected. Pareto fishbone requirements. You should have where you are with your root cause analysis, benchmarking findings, like team variance. You might even have your recommendations that you have already submitted. So all this information, these are the categories of the slides we have. So if you're going to have some preliminary recommendations, lay them out. If you're going to do a pilot, in other words, you're going to try things on a small scale, then let's talk about that and be sure you include that. So these are the things that will be in here, and this is what you'll brief. Each one of you will take a portion of this. You'll brief this information that you have, and then you need to time yourself to be sure that you can do it in about 30 minutes. Okay. All right, again. And then here's the kind of a preview of upcoming attractions, because you're going to have your financial class. You're going to have then also not too much tips that comes out of the supplier class, but then you've got your projected return on investment, things that you'll learn in the finance class. You include these things. These will be charts and other slides you'll be adding in to your presentation before we get together in February. Okay, so don't worry about this at this point. They're not necessary for this class, but these would be the placeholders and the things upcoming. This is the focus we want to have you all the way up to about your analysis here, and that will be really your requirement that we're looking for here. And then we'll schedule you up for about for these mentoring sessions about an hour, and then 45 minutes to an hour. And typically we're going to go through the slides, see where you are. And if you need some more help, we'd be glad to do additional ones. And then the second time, if you're good to go on your presentation, we do the mentoring briefing. Here's my schedule, by the way. Basically, any evening, as soon as you guys are ready, as soon as you get your assessments done, we can do the first meeting. I'm typically going to be home by 6:30 Eastern, and then you can block a time between that and 9 o'clock. I realize we've got the holidays in there. It may be very challenging. Some of you may be on leave or things like that. So if you got any issues where some of you are taking, hey, we're going to grandma's house up in Canada, right? I'm going to be gone for a week or whatever that may be. So talk about this with the team, get some tentative dates that you would like to do at least 2 mentoring sessions and your time. Send it to me through the email, and I'll confirm it back to you with a go-to-meeting invite once we work out the schedule. It's very similar to what we've done before. Okay. Any other questions? Any questions on that? No. All right. again, just as a reminder, as we go through, we talk about, for instance, here's the data we collected, here's the data collection plan, and then behind it should be all the stuff you collected since then. If you're still working on a survey, then you kind of have a placeholder for that in there, and say, okay, here's where we're going to have a slide. We're planning to do a survey. We plan to do X amount of people. Here's the results, slide that we anticipate from that. Or if you've already done one, you include that in there. If you've done a value stream map, then you say, okay, here's the data we've collected, and here's what we've got that shows our talk time, our value stream, whatever that may be. So in behind that, you should have some dark charts and things, and I want to get a good feel for where you are. What I would like to do, don't wait too much later than next week. I would like to try to get their first mentoring session in, for the Christmas, and so that I can kind of get a good feel for where you are. And if you're still trying to collect some data, still struggling, so you got some time to fix these charts before we get together for a second session. Here's an example of analysis, by the way. Sometimes you come up with just one recommendation at a time, or you say, okay, we recommend this that we do. But sometimes you come up with options. In other words, there are more than one way to get to a solution. And so what you are recommending in the improve phase sometimes are options, and there are pros and cons to this. Here's a format to help maybe use that. Here's this team here was working on deciding whether training should be quality training in the organization. They were setting up a quality program in the organization, and they were not sure whether the HR department, which traditionally handles training, should handle the quality training, or whether that training should be handled by the quality department. In other words, they're the ones that run the training program, do the training on quality, or should it be subordinate to the HR department, which had all the other training. And so what they did said, okay, here's alternative A, B, here's the advantages of that. Okay, of this doing it this way with this HR department. Here's the advantages of doing it with the quality department doing the training. And here's the disadvantages. And then kind of a cool way they do it, they just color coded the first one. Says, here's what we as a team recommend. So now what you're giving back to your sponsor, to your champion, is not only recommendations for improvement, but here's the pros, here's the cons, and here's what we think maybe is the best solution. Okay, so you're offering options, alternatives, best courses of action, and you thought it through sufficiently to say, okay, here's the pros and cons of that. You may include things like, hey, we're getting ready to make a move. Here's the pros and cons of the impact of that. Here's what we recommend as a team. So you're now not making a decision and just offering one thing, but you're offering really polished work when you do something like this, when you describe, say, okay, here's the pros and cons of doing this X, Y, Z, and then here's what we recommend to you. Okay, so that's an example. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples here of analysis, different things you may want to use. Here's one that may be done in benchmarking. This is an analysis. They went out and this actually team had 8 different organizations that they benchmarked. And what they did is said, okay, here's what one organization did, and here's their best practice. Here's another best practice, and then they went out and said, of the 8 organizations we went to, these are the ones, you see these little dots, that does this. And so you could quickly say, okay, which organizations, all of them did this, these practices, which ones did some of them, okay. And then actually the one that was, I will tell you, this one here is actually a national award winner, had all these best practices that they did. And so what they just did is said, okay, we looked at a large number of benchmarking partners, and here's the things we found to be best practices, and then which of our organizations that we visited do it. So it's just another way kind of using a matrix to array your information in a way that makes good sense. Here's another one. Basically, this chart here, it really is saying, and I want you to think about this, you got all the different things you've been learning. You've got, you went out and did some benchmarking, had a course on that. You got some things that you're bringing to the table putting into your presentation. You're doing some things, some brainstorming, coming up, maybe interviewing people in the organization, getting surveys. You got information coming from subject matter experts. Who knows this best. Maybe you also looked at in applying statistical analysis. You maybe did a value stream map. You took a look at Buddha, their sources of waste and issues. So out of these classes, which each one of these, maybe came out of these classes, is that you put all these things into kind of a big container, okay? And you say, of all these things that we're recommending, not in the eaches, okay, but we come back and say in your improvement recommendations of everything we looked at, here is our set of recommendations from all these things that we have done. Now, typically what you've done up to now, you've kind of done this by class. Keep in mind now, what you should do is say, okay, what's the best set of recommendations from the things we've done? What do we want to include? What do we want to exclude? Which ones may be near term, far term? And then what are those that we're going to recommend back to the champion? So that's the other part that happens at this point, is that you bring all these other things into play. So that's what this chart really is talking about, is that your analysis isn't just throwing things up as you got them, but you're thinking about which ones are the greatest value, and maybe how can you link information that you got from one area. Hey, we did interviews and surveys, they said about this. Here's the data from the value stream map that kind of reinforces what the survey said about non-value added areas. And here's our recommendations we got to improve that from our benchmarking. So you have that story going on, but you're using all this stuff. So I want you to relate things back to the problem statement. In the end of the day, you've got to come back and say, of all our recommendations, how is this solving our problem statement? And a lot of times, NGS teams go off on a tangent, and they start recommending solutions that had nothing to do with their problem statement. So you've got to have that logical flow. If your problem statement has changed over the time since we last met, I need to know that up front. If there's major changes on it, like scope, it sounds like team variance, you may have had some things happen with that. So we need to talk about that, but I want to know the impact on the scope and the problem statement. And then if there's any changes to that, hopefully there's not, because we should have this in the charter already. But if there is, let's talk about that. That's very, very important. But integrate things back, and I want you to, when you do your briefings, do that. Here's another way to do your analysis. Let me just kind of go through this. I'm just going to give you some tools. None of these are required, but there's just things that you may want to include, and how you portray your graphs, how you portray your recommendations. And here's a really good way to do it. You put things side by side, for instance. This team went out and said, here's what our process was. This was the as-is state. This was our detailed flow chart that we had, that we developed way back then, okay? We went out and we did some benchmarking. We found out, look, this is what theirs looks like. Nice and clean, few steps, not that complicated, but it actually got better results than ours, okay? And so it's a good way to show proposed or new, or what your findings, compare it to what you currently have. This is a technique, okay? Another technique then is that after you show the two charts, which is a visual graphic, remember you want to stay visually as much as possible, is that you then describe the differences. For instance, you go back on that one chart, we've got 8 departments that are involved. They only have 4 departments. They had, we have a gazillion steps that we use, 42 of them, and theirs was 12. Okay, so what you're now doing is then saying, okay, based on and quantifying, okay, and pointing out the differences between a better process. What's the advantages to it? Less steps, how many back and forth, they have less inspection points, whatever that is that you found or what you're recommending for improvement. You're doing some analysis and say, how is it better than what we currently got? Okay, and you're very specific about that. So you're really highlighting the benefits, okay? Reinforcing your sales. Why is this process that we're recommending to you better than the one you got now? Well, it's faster, cheaper, more efficient. Would you want some of this? Okay, now you're selling it, all right? And you're telling here's the things that we're recommending to you for improvement and why it's important for it to be implemented, the benefits to it. Okay, got to be clear about that. So if you just throw it and say, hey, we recommend this. Well, what's the pros about that? Well, you tell them, well, we can say this. What's the cons about that? How's that better than ours? So be clear if you can with that. Okay. And then again, as I mentioned, you bring these things in. Sometimes it's good to think about the recommendations you have and think about systems. Personally, when I do any type of team or improvement opportunity, in addition to improving the process, I usually use the Baldrige criteria and say, okay, what do I need to do to tell the leaders what they need to do differently in order to manage this process better? You know, maybe it's different reviews, maybe they need to get the commitment of the workforce, maybe they need to do X, Y, Z, but I kind of think about that. What are the things that may be included in future planning? Oh, there's some technology in here. We need to get this into a long-term plan. Or who are the customers involved with that? What are the information processes? Are people involved in here that we have to think about? What are the other things we're looking at? So sometimes by just thinking about a system and running it through your recommendations and say, okay, have we missed anything? You know, if we're going to make a recommendation, have we thought about the incentives part of this? People are not incentivized, are being held accountable. So we need to have a recommendation about that. Maybe we've got leaderships that have not established responsibility, ownership, that nobody owns this process. You know, that this thing is just out there, goes across a couple of different, you know, branches or divisions, and nobody owns it. So maybe we need to have a leadership think about setting responsibility. Who owns it? So you think about those things in that way. So that's another tool that we talked about way early on. And now you can bring it back in and think about, you know, how this might help you. Okay. If you're going to do a pilot, what's the purpose of a pilot? Anybody can tell me what the purpose of a pilot? We've talked about it tonight a little bit, but I would like to have you, in your own words, say, what do you think the purpose of a piloting something, piloting your recommendation? What's the approach and what's the good value of doing that?
I'd say it's a short, brief test to see what the initial outcome is, or the first reaction or impression of it is.
Okay. Okay, that's good. What else?
It's a small sample of, you could test an improvement that you'd like to implement to see if it really works without affecting your overall process.
Have any of you ever seen something gone full scale that maybe wasn't tested out first? That, you know, anybody have any experience like that?
Yes. We have a signals collection platform that we use in the Army that was not properly tested before implemented. The Army bought 24 of them back in 2011, and most of them didn't work. They were shipped directly to units in Afghanistan, and we ended up with a bunch of garbage on our hands.
Okay. An expensive set of garbage, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks. Anybody else have any comment about that? What's good point. Try it small scale. If it's going to be something of high risk, in other words, you certainly don't want to, you know, try it at the enterprise level, full deployment, and then find out it doesn't work. It's not going to help you out. The other thing about a pilot is that you need to think about what's my sampling size, and like you guys, you know, for your airframes in here, I don't know who's, you know, what's in for maintenance, right? You know, what aircraft may be available for you to test out whatever you have during the period of the time that you have. So sometimes your pilot is driven not by things you control, but, you know, the opportunity. If an airplane, yeah, Jay?
That's what I was thinking, because our aircraft are brand new. So trying to run something like that on the aircraft and the system, I don't think I could get the buy-in for a pilot.
Yeah. And so you know, if your application, which you come up with, maybe is applicable to, you know, regular maintenance, PM, not corrective maintenance, but, you know, but rather scheduled maintenance, you may think about that. You know, is there something we can do that may not be fully representative of, you know, ordering parts from an aircraft that's down due to unscheduled maintenance? But this is what you do with your chart, right? If you're going to do this, and I want you to think about it, because often this is a great benefit. If you have the ability to implement a change in procedure, to evaluate that, then you set up a set of criteria and say, how am I going to evaluate this pilot? Am I going to ask the users who do this on the line about their feedback? You know, is this a better process from their viewpoint? Did this create less defects than we thought? Did we catch more of the problem than we thought? Did this cause an issue that we hadn't thought about? Okay, and then who are we going to talk about? So what you need to think about is the duration, the scope, and more importantly, as importantly, is what's the set of criteria that you're going to use to evaluate this? Are you going to ask the users of this on a scale of 1 to 5 what they think about this? Are you going to ask about if we got enough sampling size to have a valid recommendation? How many things do we need to look at? Or are we going to recommend as a part of your recommendation back to at the end of this project, because you're coming to the end of it, that you continue this pilot, right? That you may not have enough data, that you need to have an opportunity to test this out actually on aircraft that is on scheduled maintenance, or you need to have this part, need to have this sampling size that we don't have at this point, but we need to ensure we have confidence in that. So your recommendation may be to continue that pilot if you're not able to get conclusive set of recommendations. The worst thing you can do is make a recommendation and just throw it overboard and say, okay, good luck with it. I hope it turns out. And there's a lot of things. I just had that experience today. Somebody developed a form, how to do a work request. It had pricing on it, and they sent it out not only to everybody in the organization, but to every customer they serve. And I just watched the phone melt. I just watched smoke come out of the computer about 30 minutes after it went out. So that was kind of a good example of, not doing plan, do, check, act. They hadn't field tested this thing. And so that's one of the things I want you to put, if you're going to have a pilot, to think through as a team, how are you going to do it? When are you going to do it between now and graduation? Okay. Here we are in December, towards the end. January, going into another course. Is there anything you're going to do basically in January into maybe the last week in February? Because remember, we're getting back in February, and whatever you're running, if you're going to do a pilot, you're going to have your results in probably by mid-February, so you can analyze those, make any corrections and changes to your recommendations based on it, and then have that ready to go as a set of finalized recommendations in end of February and March. So that's kind of the timeline. You're down to about 60 days here, and then I want you, as a pilot, part of this before we leave this course is that I want to know if you are going to do it, if so, what, and the scope of that, and then answer some of these questions about how you're going to evaluate it, how might you be able to benefit from this and that type of thing. So, and if you haven't figured all that out yet, put a placeholder in. For our first mentoring session, if you got things that you're still working on, they're placeholders, fine. Let's just have that out. I want to get an idea where you are, okay? And I'll give you allow me to give you feedback about if you're going to have something that's going to be doable for graduation. And I'll probably have the best feel from that because I've seen what teams do and what you're about to go through. So we'll have that discussion about pilots, your other set of recommendations, and then when you recommend your improvement phase, that's kind of where we are. Here's our set of recommendations, and here's how we do it. Here's kind of a control thing, and we've got a video and I recommend you look at. Again, this is kind of moving a little bit closer because typically you recommend how are you going to, whatever you recommend for your improvements, then how are you then going to ensure that they're monitored, that they have hit the performance targets that you think you will? What will be the metrics that you're going to recommend they review, at what time and what level? And how does that look like? You know, we'll recommend that you're going to continue to use a run chart, or we're going to use a Pareto, and watch the number of defects go down, or the number of XYZ issues, whatever the visuals are. You typically, and you usually use the same ones, or the ones that you had in your measure phase, and recommend that you monitor and continue to look at these in your control phase. So that's a little bit about that. I'm not so concerned about you developing any of that at this point, but I want you to think about it, about how you're going to measure the goodness of your recommendations. How will you know that it actually hit the target? How will you know in 6 weeks, 6 months, a year from now, that it's achieving this desired outcome, whether it's financial impacts, performance impacts, whatever that might be. So think about, a lot of times in thinking that through, how you're going to measure it, will tell you also what you need to recommend. So sometimes just thinking about the criteria for measurement helps you figure out a little bit better which. Oh, okay. And then, again, we'll talk more about that in Master Business Process 2. We're going to ask you what your controls, and then your action plans and such. So this is, again, something for you to think about. Not required to put the control charts in there at this point. And then here. So let me, I'm going to open it up. We're going to stop a little early tonight because of, I know you had a double header. I've covered a lot of the key things that are important for you to work on, and that is any showstoppers I need to know about ASAP. If there's something you want to talk to me further after the class, then we've got some time to do that. Data collection, focus in on that. A lot of times these are still things you just haven't gotten to it. You've got the time in this course to work on that, try to get it done. Sometimes it's challenging over the holidays, but you need to bring that into closure. You need to have enough data that you can develop recommendations. And if you don't think you have that data, I'm going to ask you how we might be able to get to that. And with the data you do have, what are the emerging recommendations? If there's any refinement to the problem statement, shouldn't be, because but if there are, let me know. And most importantly, be sure you get that charter signed. I mean, that's absolutely critical. We need to get my signature, each one of your team members, and upload it into the tracker. So put that at the top of the list, along with the other things we've got to do. Is that if some of the teams don't have a signed, champion charter in, be sure that is accomplished. Let's get that done. I'd like to get it done at the first class if we can, ahead of that. And then figure out your team briefings, and then focus back on putting these charts together in this list. Okay, and then we'll go over that list. We'll go over your briefing. Let's see, the charts are back here. Oops. These categories. You can have more than 19, but keep in mind, and a lot of your data may be more than that. I'd like to see what benchmarking findings that you have. Talk about that, what you've been able to get from your other courses as we go through. And you're going to have, after we kind of go through this, you're going to have some time for you to go through your presentation and time yourself. I hardly recommend that you listen to yourself, that you practice it. You practice before you get with me in your final briefing, because if you're over time significantly or don't cover the key points, we're going to schedule another team mentoring session until you get it, to a point where you're going to be satisfactory. Because if you can't do it here at MBT 2, you're going to have a real challenge, I will tell you, when you have additional charts by Master Business Process 3. So I want you to be successful. I want you to think through this. I want you to do your briefings. And then we'll have a written component with talking notes in there that we'll include here for Matthew. So divvy up the assignments you have as a team about who's going to be briefing what portions of your presentation. And when you do your briefing, by the way, I will sit quietly on this side of the phone, just you briefing, and you go from the beginning to the end. I'll time you. And then after that, I'll have you do a self-analysis, and then I'll give you my feedback about your presentation. And typically, all the teams learn a lot from this drill. So that's where I'm going to end tonight. I've covered a lot of stuff about mechanics of tonight's class. A lot of the content in here are suggested tools for analysis. You don't have to use those. If it's appropriate for your use, then I'll encourage you to do that. And that's where I'm going to stop tonight. So let me ask, what questions do you have about where we are, either the course, outcomes, content, or any other comments? Judith, do you have anything?
Professor, is there any chance you might be able to email out this new PowerPoint? Since you said that there's some information on here that wasn't on the one in the course materials.
Yeah, I'll email this version out to you right after we jump off of this, and so you'll have it.
Thank you, sir.
Bet. Okay. Edgar, got anything else?
Not at the moment. Just I'll have to check it with Cameron tomorrow, and then see where we go from this after he looks at the lesson that we just went over.
Okay, great. All right. Judith, do you have anything? Jamie? Uh-oh. I don't know if we're losing the auto. I've got little phone lights lighting up, but I'm not hearing anything. Folks, do you hear your other students talking right now?
I can hear.
Just you, sir.
Was that Judith?
Yes, sir. I heard you,
Okay.
and yeah.
Got any questions?
No questions, sir. As you said, I will be speaking with my team in regards to leave, because I'll be going on leave for Christmas. So I just
Okay.
sent a quick text to Matthew to let him know, so we would be able to pick the first session pretty soon.
Thanks. It's not 75 degrees there, is it? Are you back in Key West?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay. All
It's
right.
a bit chilly.
Yeah, I think we need to have a team meeting down there, by the way. Okay. All right.
We had
Ron?
a cold front coming in.
You did? Yeah, what did you get down to? 65, something like that?
About, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Ron?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Any anything that we covered tonight, or any other comments, questions?
No, I'm pretty straightforward on everything right now.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. Sam, how about you?
I have no questions.
Okay. All right, folks. I'll hang on if any of you still wanted to question. Thanks again for hanging in twice in a week, and look forward to our next mentoring session. So, everyone have a good evening.
Good night.
All right.
Night, sir.
All right. All right.